The number on the screen was a death sentence, down 19% in a single day. To Jeff Bezos, watching his company's stock price collapse, it felt like the world was calling his life's work a fraud. The mockery that had been a low whisper on Wall Street had just become a public scream. And it was all because of one man and one devastating report. It was June 2000, and the digital gold rush was over. The dot-com bubble, which had minted paper millionaires overnight, was now violently, catastrophically bursting. Companies that had once been valued in the billions were now worth less than their office furniture. Pets.com, Webvan, eToys, they were all evaporating, leaving behind nothing but empty warehouses and a public that had lost all faith in the promise of the internet. And in the middle of this carnage stood Amazon.com, the poster child for the internet boom, now teetering on the edge of the same abyss. For years, Wall Street had tolerated Amazon's baffling strategy: sell billions of dollars worth of goods, but never, ever make a profit. They had given Bezos the benefit of the doubt during the mania, but now the patience was gone. The market wanted blood, and it wanted profits. Amazon had neither. Then came the report from Ravi Surya, a respected analyst at Lehman Brothers. It wasn't just a negative outlook, it was an execution order. Surya's analysis was brutal and direct. He pointed to Amazon's weak balance sheet, its poor working capital management, and its massive cash burn rate. He argued that the company was bleeding money so fast it would run out of cash within a year. His conclusion was a dagger to the heart of Bezos's vision. Amazon, he wrote, was a company with a flawed business model that is not sustainable. The market reacted instantly. The stock, which had traded at over $100 a share just 6 months earlier, was now plummeting into single digits. The media pounced. The story wasn't just about a struggling company anymore. It was about the hubris of its founder. They called his company Amazon.bomb. They derisively labeled it Amazon.org, as if it were a non-profit charity dedicated to giving customers cheap books at the expense of its investors. They portrayed Bezos as a charlatan, a fast-talking Princeton grad who had sold the world a fantasy and was about to be exposed. Inside Amazon's Seattle headquarters, the mood was grim. The stock ticker was a constant, blinking reminder of their impending doom. Employees watched their life savings, tied up in stock options that were now effectively worthless, vanish into thin air. Every news report, every analyst call, every headline reinforced the same terrifying message: you are failing. The world believes you are a joke. But Jeff Bezos wasn't panicking. He wasn't lashing out. In fact, to the bewilderment of many around him, he seemed almost serene. Because what Ravi Surya and the rest of Wall Street saw as a fatal flaw, Bezos saw as the entire point. They were looking at a photograph of a single ugly caterpillar. He was watching a film of its slow, painful, but deliberate transformation into something else entirely. They were playing checkers, focused on the next move, the next quarter's earnings. Bezos was playing a game of chess so long, on a board so vast, that no one else could even see the pieces. To understand the contempt the world had for Amazon in 2000, you have to understand the philosophy that drove it. It was all laid out in a simple, almost academic document from 1997, the first ever letter to Amazon shareholders. It has since become a legendary text in business, but at the time, it was seen as the bizarre manifesto of a man who didn't understand how money worked. In it, Bezos stated his intentions with absolute clarity. He wrote, "We believe that a fundamental measure of our success will be the shareholder value we create over the long term." Then came the line that broke every rule of 20th century business. We will continue to make investment decisions in light of long-term market leadership considerations rather than short-term profitability considerations. To the titans of traditional retail and the wizards of Wall Street, this was heresy. It was a formal declaration that he intended to lose money on purpose. And lose money he did. The numbers were staggering, almost comical in their defiance of business logic. In 1997, the year he went public, Amazon lost $27.6 million. In 1998, it lost $74.6 million. In 1999, as the bubble reached its peak, the company's revenue soared to $1.6 billion, a stunning figure. But its losses ballooned to an eye-watering $720 million. For every dollar of books, CDs, and electronics it sold, it was losing nearly 50 cents. Then, in the year 2000, the year of the crash, the year Ravi Surya declared it was finished, Amazon posted its biggest loss in history, a breathtaking $1.4 billion. The critics felt vindicated. This wasn't a strategy, it was a death spiral. Any sane CEO would see these numbers and immediately slam on the brakes, cut costs, raise prices. Continue from the year Ravi Surya declared it was finished, Amazon posted its biggest loss in history, a breathtaking $1.4 billion. The critics felt vindicated. This wasn't a strategy, it was a death spiral. Any sane CEO would see these numbers and immediately slam on the brakes, cut costs, raise prices, stop the bleeding, and try to squeeze out a tiny profit to appease the markets. Bezos did the exact opposite. He pushed his foot down, flooring the accelerator. The money wasn't just disappearing. It was being systematically converted into a physical empire that no one understood the value of. When Amazon launched in 1995, its competitors in the book world, giant chains like Barnes & Noble and Borders, laughed. They were the establishment. They had hundreds of stores, deep relationships with publishers, and millions of loyal customers. They saw Amazon as a tiny gnat, a website run out of a garage in a Seattle suburb. Leonard Riggio, the formidable CEO of Barnes & Noble, saw Bezos's creation as a trivial threat. When Barnes & Noble launched its own website in 1997, the consensus was that the game was over. The real bookseller was here now. How could a money-losing website possibly compete with a company that had a physical bookstore just a few miles from nearly every American? Bezos understood something they didn't. Their stores, their greatest asset, were also their greatest liability. A physical Barnes & Noble superstore, the largest of its kind, could hold maybe 150,000 unique book titles. It was an impressive number, but it was a finite one, dictated by the laws of physics and real estate. Bezos had no such constraints. His website could offer 1 million titles, then 2 million, then 5. It was the Earth's biggest bookstore, and it was a promise no physical store could ever match. But to make that promise a reality, he had to solve a colossal physical problem. He needed warehouses, not just one, but a network of them. In 1997, the same year the company went public, he spent millions on a new 200,000 square foot distribution center in Delaware, on the opposite side of the country from Seattle. Wall Street analysts were baffled. Why was this virtual company spending a fortune on physical buildings? To Bezos, the answer was obvious. The only way to win was to control the entire customer experience. That meant getting products to people faster and more reliably than anyone else. He couldn't depend on third-party distributors. He had to build his own logistics network from the ground up. So, while Barnes & Noble was investing in better lighting and in-store coffee shops, Bezos was investing in conveyor belts, inventory management software, and acres upon acres of concrete and steel shelving. He poured hundreds of millions into these fulfillment centers, a term he popularized. By 1999, Amazon had a network of massive warehouses strategically placed across the country, and more in the UK and Germany. Each one was a cash-burning furnace, a massive operating expense that dragged down the balance sheet. But each one was also a node in a network that was becoming exponentially more powerful. When a customer in Boston ordered a book, it didn't have to travel from Seattle. It shipped from a warehouse a few hours away. Delivery times started to shrink from weeks to days. This obsession with infrastructure was paired with a relentless expansion into new product categories, each one a fresh assault on a different sector of traditional retail. In 1998, it was music and DVDs, a direct attack on stores like Tower Records. In 1999, it was electronics, toys, and tools, putting them in competition with Best Buy, Toys R Us, and Home Depot. With each new category, the financial losses mounted. They had to source new products, build new supplier relationships, and reconfigure their warehouses for items of all shapes and sizes, from a tiny memory card to a massive television. The complexity was immense, and the cost was astronomical. To the outside world, it looked like sheer madness. They weren't just a bookstore that couldn't make money. They were now a department store that couldn't make money. Barron's, the influential financial magazine, published a scathing cover story in 1999 titled Amazon Bomb, predicting the stock, then at over $100, was heading for a crash. The article was mocked by the bulls at the time, but a year later it looked prophetic. The core of the conflict was a fundamental disagreement about the purpose of a company. Wall Street and the old guard of retail saw a business as a machine for generating profit. You put in $1 of capital and you expected to get back more than $1 in a reasonable amount of time. Bezos saw Amazon as a machine for generating customers. He believed that if you could acquire millions of loyal customers by offering them a better experience, more selection, lower prices, and faster delivery, the profits would eventually follow, but on a scale that no one could yet imagine. He was famous for his mantra, "Your margin is my opportunity." If a traditional retailer was making a 30% profit margin on a product, Bezos saw that 30% not as profit to be booked, but as fuel. He could lower the price by 20%, delighting the customer, and stealing market share, and then reinvest the remaining 10% back into building more warehouses and better technology to lower his costs even further. This created a virtuous cycle, a concept he would later sketch out on a napkin and call the flywheel. It was a brilliantly simple diagram that explained his entire business. Lower prices led to more customer visits. More customers increased the volume of sales and attracted more third-party sellers to the site. That led to a greater selection of products, which further improved the customer experience. This whole loop was spun by Amazon's growing infrastructure and technological prowess, which allowed it to operate at a lower cost structure, which in turn allowed it to lower prices even more. The flywheel would spin slowly at first, but with each turn it would gain momentum, powered by every dollar of reinvested profit. The analysts at Lehman Brothers didn't see a flywheel. They saw a company that was losing a race against time, burning through its cash reserves with every turn of the wheel. And in early 2001, it looked like they were right. The crash had been brutal. The capital markets, which had once thrown money at any company with a .com in its name, were now completely frozen. Amazon needed cash to survive, and it couldn't get it from the stock market. Bezos was forced to go to the bond markets, securing $672 million in convertible bonds from European investors. The terms were terrible, a reflection of how risky his company was now perceived to be. It was a lifeline, but a costly one. For the first time, the pressure became so immense that the strategy of growth at all costs had to be tempered with a dose of reality. Bezos made the hardest decision of his career. He laid off 1,300 employees, 15% of his workforce. It was a public admission, but a costly one. For the first time, the pressure became so immense that the strategy of growth at all costs had to be tempered with a dose of reality. Bezos made the hardest decision of his career. He laid off 1,300 employees, 15% of his workforce. It was a public admission that the critics had, on some level, been right. The company was bloated and inefficient. The path they were on was, just as Ravi Surya had said, unsustainable. As the laid-off employees walked out of the Seattle headquarters with their cardboard boxes, it looked like the end of the dream. The mockery had become reality. The laughter from Wall Street and the boardrooms of his competitors echoed across a landscape of dot-com wreckage. The joke was over, and Jeff Bezos was the punchline. The joke was over, and Jeff Bezos was the punchline. But within the walls of his wounded company, he wasn't telling jokes, he was issuing commandments. The crisis was not an end, he told his remaining staff, but a clarification. The era of irrational exuberance was gone, and it had exposed the weaknesses in their culture. They had been seduced by the easy money of the bubble, hiring too fast, spending too carelessly. That would stop. From this moment forward, Amazon would be forged in the fires of scarcity. He introduced a new, almost fanatical devotion to one of his core leadership principles: frugality. It became a religion. Gone were the free ibuprofen and fancy catered lunches. Travel budgets were slashed. Corporate apartments were eliminated. Famously, the company began making desks out of cheap wooden doors and 4x4 posts because they were far cheaper than standard office furniture. This wasn't just about saving money. It was a physical, daily reminder of their new reality. It was a message to every employee: every dollar matters. Think like an owner, not a renter. This disciplined mindset directly attacked the heart of Ravi Surya's critique, that Amazon was a company with poor working capital management. Bezos was determined to build the most efficient operational machine the world had ever seen. The true laboratory for this new religion was not in the corporate offices, but in the cavernous, chaotic fulfillment centers. In the rush to grow, the warehouses had become monuments to inefficiency. Employees, known as pickers, would wander miles of aisles every day, armed with a paper printout, searching for items to fulfill an order. It was a system built on human intuition and brute force. Now, Bezos and his lieutenants, particularly Jeff Wilke, a manufacturing expert from Allied Signal, declared war on every wasted second, every unnecessary footstep. They turned the warehouses into a giant math problem. They started collecting data on everything: the time it took to pick a single item, the distance between shelves, the optimal path through the aisles for a multi-item order. They developed new inventory software that didn't organize books by author or CDs by artist, but by a system of controlled chaos. A popular Harry Potter novel might be stored right next to a box of power drills. It seemed nonsensical, but the algorithm knew that placing frequently ordered but unrelated items close together would minimize the picker's travel time. They called the process of improving warehouse efficiency Kaizen, a Japanese term for continuous improvement. Teams would hold stand-up meetings every morning to discuss bottlenecks from the previous day. A picker who found a faster way to scan an item would see their idea implemented across the entire network within weeks. It was a slow, grueling, unglamorous process. There were no flashy headlines about warehouse optimization. Wall Street didn't care about the ergonomics of a packing station. Continue from previous day. A picker who found a faster way to scan an item would see their idea implemented across the entire network within weeks. It was a slow, grueling, unglamorous process. There were no flashy headlines about warehouse optimization. Wall Street didn't care about the ergonomics of a packing station. But inside Amazon, this was the real war. By reducing the cycle time, the total time from a customer's click to the package leaving the warehouse, by mere seconds, they were saving millions. While competitors like Barnes& Noble were still focused on the front-end customer experience in their stores, Amazon was obsessively perfecting the hidden, back-end machinery of e-commerce. They were building a logistics moat around their business, and it was getting wider and deeper with every package they shipped. Then, in 2002, Bezos made a decision that seemed to violate his own newfound religion of frugality. He launched free Super Saver shipping on orders over $99, later dropping the threshold to $49 and then to a seemingly impossible $25. To his rivals, this was definitive proof that he hadn't learned his lesson. Shipping was one of the biggest costs in e-commerce. Giving it away for free on such a low order value was financial suicide. It was another Amazon.org moment, a seemingly charitable act that would surely sink the company. But Bezos wasn't giving away a product. He was buying a behavior. The data team had discovered a critical insight. The single biggest factor causing customers to abandon their online shopping carts was the shock of the shipping cost at checkout. By removing that friction, even if it meant taking a loss on the shipment itself, they could dramatically increase the number of people who completed their purchases. More importantly, free shipping fundamentally altered consumer psychology. People would actively search for an extra book or DVD to add to their cart just to cross the $25 threshold. It encouraged them to consolidate their shopping at Amazon instead of buying single items from multiple sites. It was a loyalty program disguised as a discount. Continue from altered consumer psychology. People would actively search for an extra book or DVD to add to their cart just to cross the $25 threshold. It encouraged them to consolidate their shopping at Amazon instead of buying single items from multiple sites. It was a loyalty program disguised as a discount. What looked like a massive cost center on the balance sheet was, in fact, one of the most effective marketing investments in history. It was a perfect example of the flywheel in action. The cost of free shipping drove more customer traffic, which increased sales volume, which allowed Amazon to get better shipping rates from carriers like UPS and FedEx, which in turn lowered the cost of offering free shipping. The move was a masterstroke, a direct investment in customer loyalty that his competitors, trapped by their quarterly profit targets, could not afford to match. The relentless focus on efficiency and the bold bet on free shipping culminated in the fourth quarter of 2001. In the midst of a post-9/11 recession, when the entire retail sector was bracing for disaster, Amazon reported its first-ever profit. It was a tiny number, almost a rounding error, just $5 million in net income on over $1 billion in revenue for the quarter. But it was the most important $5 million in the company's history. It was a symbol. It was proof. The model, the crazy, cash-burning long-term vision that Ravi Surya and all the critics had declared flawed and unsustainable, actually worked. It could, under the right conditions and with ruthless discipline, generate a profit. The narrative began to shift. The mockery didn't stop overnight, but it grew quieter. Amazon bomb was diffused. The question was no longer if Amazon would survive, but what it would become. Bezos answered that question almost immediately with his next move, one that was perhaps even more counterintuitive than free shipping. He decided to invite his competitors to come and sell their products directly on his website. In 2000, he launched Amazon Marketplace, a platform that allowed third-party sellers, from tiny mom-and-pop shops to large retailers, to list their items for sale right alongside Amazon's own inventory. To the outside world, this was insane. Why would you allow another company to sell the exact same toaster, sometimes for a lower price, on your own product page? It was like Walmart inviting Target to set up a kiosk in the middle of one of its supercenters. It seemed like a direct act of self-sabotage, cannibalizing their own hard-won sales. But Bezos saw a much bigger game. He wasn't building a store, he was building an economy. He knew Amazon could never stock every product in the world. But by opening his platform to millions of other sellers, he could get infinitely closer to that goal. The Earth's biggest bookstore could finally become the everything store. The strategic brilliance was multi-layered. First, selection exploded. Suddenly, customers could find rare books, obscure electronics, and specialty items that Amazon itself would never bother to stock. This made the website stickier and more useful, reinforcing the flywheel. Second, it created intense price competition. If Amazon was selling a popular camera for $200 and a third-party seller listed it for $190, the customer won. This reinforced Amazon's reputation as the low-price leader, even when it wasn't Amazon making the sale. And third, it was an astonishingly profitable business model. Amazon didn't have to buy, store, or ship these third-party products. It simply provided the digital shelf space, the payment processing, and the customer traffic. For this service, it took a healthy commission on every single sale. It was high-margin revenue with almost no capital investment. Astonishingly profitable business model. Amazon didn't have to buy, store, or ship these third-party products. It simply provided the digital shelf space, the payment processing, and the customer traffic. For this service, it took a healthy commission on every single sale. It was high-margin revenue with almost no capital investment. The critics had lambasted Bezos for his low-margin retail business. He had responded by building a high-margin technology platform right in the middle of it. This move baffled his old-world competitors. In 2001, Toys R Us, the dominant toy retailer, had signed a 10-year exclusive deal to be the sole seller of toys and baby products on Amazon. They were paying Amazon tens of millions a year for the privilege. But when they saw other, smaller toy sellers popping up on the site via Marketplace, they were furious. They sued Amazon, claiming a breach of their exclusivity. The lawsuit revealed the chasm in thinking between the two companies. Toys R Us saw Amazon as a simple retail channel they had rented. Bezos saw Amazon as a neutral marketplace for all sellers, and he refused to give any single partner preferential treatment if it meant a worse experience or less selection for the customer. Amazon ultimately won the legal battle, but the real victory was strategic. Toys R Us, stuck in a 20th century mindset, eventually went bankrupt. Amazon, by building a platform instead of just a store, was just getting started. The company that had been the butt of every joke in 2000 had spent the next 3 years getting its house in order, sharpening its operational knives, and quietly building the weapons for its next phase of conquest. The laughter had all but faded, replaced by the nervous silence of competitors who were beginning to realize that the game they were playing was over. They just didn't know what the new game was yet. And they had no idea that while they were busy trying to understand how Amazon was mastering the world of atoms, of boxes, warehouses, and trucks, Bezos was already preparing to conquer the world of bits. Bezos was already preparing to conquer the world of bits. The genesis of this conquest came not from a grand strategic vision, but from an internal, intensely frustrating problem. By the early 2000s, Amazon was no longer a simple website. It was a sprawling, complex beast of software. Hundreds of small, independent teams of developers were working on different parts of the site: the shopping cart, the recommendation engine, the search function, the third-party seller pages. But every time a team wanted to launch a new feature, they ran into a catastrophic bottleneck. To get the computing resources they needed, servers, storage, databases, they had to submit a formal request to a centralized infrastructure group. The process was painfully slow, bogged down by bureaucracy and technical hurdles. It could take weeks, sometimes months, just to get a new project off the ground. This friction was infuriating to Bezos. His entire company was built on speed and agility, yet his own internal technology was acting like a giant anchor, dragging them down. He saw developers, his most valuable and creative employees, spending most of their time waiting instead of building. In a now legendary off-site meeting with his top technology leaders in 2003, he posed a simple yet world-changing question. He asked them, "What is Amazon.com really good at?" After some discussion, they landed on a core competency: running reliable, scalable, and cost-effective infrastructure. They had spent nearly a decade and billions of dollars building a massive global network of data centers to power their own retail website, one of the most trafficked destinations on the entire internet. They had become accidental experts in managing computing power at a scale few companies in the world could comprehend. The insight that followed was staggering in its audacity. What if they took their internal solution to their internal problem, cleaned it up, and sold it as a service to the rest of the world? This was the birth of Amazon Web Services, or AWS. The idea was to take the fundamental components of computing, things like server capacity, data storage, and database management, and offer them as a utility, like electricity or water. Any developer, from a single person working on an app in their garage to a massive corporation, could go to a website, swipe a credit card, and get access to the same world-class computing infrastructure that powered Amazon.com. They wouldn't have to buy expensive servers, hire engineers to maintain them, or guess how much capacity they would need. They could simply rent what they needed, paying only for what they used, and scale it up or down instantly. This concept, now known as cloud computing, was so radical and so far outside of Amazon's perceived business model that almost no one understood it. When AWS launched its first major services, S3 for storage in 2006 and EC2 for computing a few months later, the reaction from the technology world was a mixture of confusion and dismissal. Microsoft, the undisputed king of enterprise software, was focused on selling packaged software like Windows Server and SQL Server for companies to run in their own data centers. Oracle was dominant in the world of corporate databases. IBM and HP made billions selling physical server hardware. These giants looked at AWS and saw a toy. They saw it as a niche product for small startups and hobbyists. They couldn't imagine any serious large company entrusting its most critical data and applications to the infrastructure of an online bookseller. The idea was laughable. It was a distraction, a bizarre side project for a retail company that should be focused on fighting Walmart. For years, Wall Street barely paid attention. In Amazon's quarterly earnings reports, the revenue from AWS was buried deep inside an other category, a financial footnote that was too small to warrant its own line item. Bezos was once again playing a long game that no one else could see, and he was happy to let his competitors laugh while he quietly built the plumbing for the next generation of the internet. While AWS was being built in the background, Bezos unleashed another disruptive force on the world of atoms, one that attacked the very soul of his original business, the book. In 2004, he secretly created a new lab in Silicon Valley, codenamed Lab 12.6. Its mission was simple and profound: to make any book ever printed, in any language, available for download in 60 seconds. The goal was not just to sell digital books, but to improve upon the physical book itself, a technology that had gone largely unchanged for 500 years. Bezos was convinced that reading was too important to be left to the analog world. He tasked the engineers at Lab 12.6 with building a dedicated electronic reading device that would be so good it would disappear in the hands of the reader, allowing them to become completely lost in the story. The project was named Kindle. The technical challenges were immense. They needed a screen that didn't have the glare of a computer monitor and could be read in direct sunlight. They settled on a new technology called e-ink, which used tiny microcapsules to mimic the appearance of ink on paper. They needed a battery that could last for weeks, not hours. But the biggest and most audacious requirement, the one that everyone told Bezos was impossible, was that the device had to have its own built-in wireless connection to the internet. And that connection had to be free. The user would never get a bill. They wouldn't have to hunt for a Wi-Fi hotspot. They could be on a bus, on a beach, in the middle of a park, and if they wanted to buy a book, they could do it right from the device in under a minute. To achieve this, Amazon had to build a brand new cellular network, which they called WhisperNet. They secretly cut deals with cellular carriers, agreeing to pay for all the data their customers would use. It was a massive, expensive gamble. When the first Kindle was launched in November 2007, the initial reaction from the literary and tech elite was lukewarm. The device itself was clunky and beige, with an awkward physical keyboard. Steve Jobs, who had just launched the sleek, beautiful iPhone a few months earlier, famously declared, "The whole conception is flawed at the top because people don't read anymore." Competitors in the publishing world were deeply skeptical. They saw it as another attempt by Amazon to devalue their product and seize control of their industry. But customers didn't care about the clunky design. They cared about the magic of the experience. The first production run of the Kindle sold out in 5.5 hours. For the first time, readers could carry an entire library in their bag. They could adjust the font size to their liking. And most importantly, they could act on the impulse to read a book and be reading it seconds later. It was frictionless. In 5.5 hours, for the first time, readers could carry an entire library in their bag. They could adjust the font size to their liking. And most importantly, they could act on the impulse to read a book and be reading it seconds later. It was frictionless. The Kindle, combined with the massive ebook store that Amazon had built, created its own flywheel. The more Kindles they sold, the more publishers were forced to make their books available digitally. The more ebooks were available, the more compelling it was to own a Kindle. Amazon had not just created a new product, it had created and now completely dominated an entirely new market. Between the invisible world-eating growth of AWS and the visible, industry-shattering success of the Kindle, Amazon transformed itself in the mid-2000s. It was no longer a simple online retailer. It was a technology company with a retail division. But the most powerful expression of this transformation, the final piece of the puzzle that would lock in millions of customers and create the ultimate competitive moat, came in 2005. It was a program called Amazon Prime. For a flat annual fee of $79, customers would get free 2-day shipping on all eligible purchases with no minimum order size. Internally, the program was controversial. Finance executives projected it would cost the company a fortune in shipping revenue. They called it Amazon Prime Air because they thought the only way to make the economics work would be to fly the packages themselves. But Bezos saw it differently. He understood that once a customer paid that $79 fee, their shopping behavior would change forever. They had made a commitment. They were now a member of the club. They would have a psychological incentive to get their money's worth. To start every single shopping search not on Google but on Amazon.com. He was right. Prime members on average spent more than double what non-Prime members spent on the site. Prime wasn't a shipping program. It was a loyalty machine. It converted casual shoppers into Amazon fanatics. Continue from their money's worth to start every single shopping search not on Google but on Amazon.com. He was right. Prime members, on average, spent more than double what non-Prime members spent on the site. Prime wasn't a shipping program. It was a loyalty machine. It converted casual shoppers into Amazon fanatics. And over the years, Bezos and his team began to layer more and more benefits into the program, making the value proposition irresistible. They added a streaming video service to compete with Netflix. They added a streaming music service to compete with Spotify. They added free ebook lending from the Kindle library. Each new feature added a new thread to the rope that bound customers to the Amazon ecosystem. The $79 fee, once a gamble, now looked like the greatest bargain in the history of commerce. Competitors like Walmart and Target could try to match the free shipping, but they couldn't match the ecosystem. They were stores. Amazon had become an indispensable part of its customers' daily lives. By 2010, the company that had been derided as Amazon.org a decade earlier was a colossus. The laughter of its rivals had long since turned into a stunned silence. The silence of companies who realized they hadn't just been beaten, they had been made obsolete. They thought they were in a street fight over profit margins. Bezos had been quietly building a Death Star. Bezos had been quietly building a Death Star. And in the 2010s, he began to turn its power on the rest of the galaxy. The first clear demonstration of its awesome, terrifying capabilities came in 2015, when Amazon finally decided to break out the financial results for AWS. For 10 years, it had been a ghost in the machine, a footnote in the earnings reports. Wall Street analysts had tried to guess its size, but most assumed it was a small, marginally profitable side business. The reality was a shockwave that rattled the entire technology industry. In the first quarter of 2015, Amazon revealed that AWS was a $5 billion a year business growing at nearly 50% year over year. More stunningly, it was wildly profitable, with operating margins north of 17%. Suddenly, the entire Amazon narrative inverted. The critics had spent 15 years mocking the company for its razor-thin, often non-existent retail profit margins. It turned out that hidden inside the unprofitable retailer was one of the most profitable, high-growth enterprise technology companies on the planet. AWS was the engine that had been secretly funding the entire Amazon empire. The river of high-margin profit from the cloud computing division gave Bezos the ultimate weapon, the ability to continue running his retail operation at near zero margin forever. He could afford to lose money on every Kindle, subsidize every Prime membership, and relentlessly lower prices on retail goods, all while his competitors, who had to make a profit on every item sold, bled to death trying to keep up. Companies like Walmart and Target were forced to spend billions of their own money to build e-commerce capabilities, but they were a decade behind. Worse, many of them were ironically paying their chief competitor to do it. Netflix, one of Amazon Video's biggest rivals, ran its entire streaming service on AWS. Even the CIA, the most security-conscious organization in the world, signed a $600 million deal to have AWS build its private cloud. The old guard of tech, Microsoft, Oracle, IBM, were caught completely flat-footed. They had dismissed the cloud as a fad, and now they were in a desperate race to catch a company that had a 10-year head start. With AWS printing money and Prime locking in customers, Amazon entered a phase of audacious, almost unchecked expansion. It was no longer content to just sell other companies' products. It began to build its own. The launch of the Amazon Echo speaker in 2014 seemed like another quirky side project, a Bluetooth speaker with a slightly awkward voice assistant named Alexa. But Bezos saw it as the next great computing interface. He believed that voice would eventually replace keyboards and touchscreens for many interactions. By placing a cheap, always-on listening device in millions of homes, he was creating a new, frictionless channel directly into the Amazon ecosystem. Alexa, order more paper towels, became the modern equivalent of a one-click purchase. It was a Trojan horse for commerce. And it gave Amazon an invaluable stream of data about what people wanted, what they listened to, and how they ran their households. The company also began to move aggressively from the digital world back into the physical one, but on its own terms. It opened physical bookstores, a move dripping with irony. But these weren't like the bookstores of old. They were data-driven showrooms, stocking only the books that were most popular on Amazon.com, with prices that changed dynamically for Prime members. But the true earthquake came in 2017 with the acquisition of Whole Foods Market for $13.7 billion. It was a stunning move that sent shockwaves through the $800 billion grocery industry. The message was clear: no sector of retail was safe. With Whole Foods, Amazon instantly acquired over 400 physical stores in prime urban locations, solving its last-mile problem for fresh food delivery. It now had a physical footprint that could double as a distribution hub for all of its products. They immediately began integrating their technology, offering Prime member discounts and placing Amazon lockers for package pickup inside the stores. The competitors who had once laughed at the virtual bookseller were now faced with a rival that was a logistics powerhouse, a cloud computing giant, and a physical retailer all at once. The story of Ravi Surya, the Lehman Brothers analyst who had written Amazon's obituary in 2000, provides the perfect bookend to this journey. Lehman Brothers, the institution that had deemed Amazon's business model flawed and unsustainable, ceased to exist in 2018, becoming the most spectacular casualty of the financial crisis, a crisis born of the very short-term, profit-obsessed thinking that Bezos had rejected from day one. Amazon, on the other hand, survived and thrived. In 2018, its market capitalization crossed $1 trillion. The shares that Surya's report had sent plummeting to under $10 were now trading for over $2,000. That initial $1,000 investment in Amazon's 1997 IPO was now worth more than $1.2 million. The mockery that had defined the company's early years was now completely forgotten, replaced by a mixture of awe and fear. Bezos was no longer the quirky, nerdy bookseller with a weird laugh. He was a titan, a visionary who had fundamentally rewired the global economy. The central joke, that he was running a company that never made a profit, turned out to be the punchline to a much longer, more complex story. He wasn't avoiding profits, he was deferring them. He was relentlessly reinvesting every single dollar of potential earnings into building an impenetrable fortress of technology, logistics, and customer loyalty. He was playing a game with a time horizon of decades, while the rest of the world was playing a game with a time horizon of 90 days. He understood that in the internet age, market leadership wasn't just about being the best, it was about being the one who could afford to invest the most for the longest period of time. The laughter stopped when the world finally woke up and realized that Amazon wasn't just a store, it was the store. It wasn't just a website, it was the essential infrastructure of modern commerce and the internet itself, a global utility as fundamental as electricity. The competitors who had mocked him for losing money were now either bankrupt, irrelevant, or forced to pay tribute to him by using his cloud services. Jeff Bezos had the last laugh, and it was a laugh that echoed from the cloud all the way to your front door.